All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk about the importance of deleting stuff. I'm Václav. I work as a software engineer at News, where we build software for hotels. Though I'm mostly focused on backend, so I'm a bit of an imposter here. So if you're looking for someone for your bingo card, feel free to put me in. So why are we here? We originally gave this talk at an internal conference at News, where the goal was to find one designer, one product manager, and one engineer, and find some topic that we would have in common. And it turns out this is really hard to do. We argue about a lot of stuff, but it turns out there's this one thing that all of us can agree on. And at this conference, there were a lot of controversial topics, but this one ended up being the most popular because it turns out this idea is something that really brings us all together and something we can all agree on. So if you have trouble talking to your PMs or your designers, maybe deleting stuff is some common ground you can start on. And I kind of followed my own advice and I deleted the other two speakers from this conference. So now you're just stuck with me. Okay, why did we give that original talk in the first place? It's all based on this simple observation that by adding something, you take something away. There's always an associated cost to adding something. Adding something is never free, even code, especially not code. Code can be really expensive, and like as an industry, we started noticing that code is more of a liability than an asset. If we can solve a problem without adding code, that's even better. Or even the best solution if we can solve problems by deleting code. So one big reason why we should delete stuff is that if we don't delete it, we have to maintain it. So there's like a static cost to maintaining something that we just have to keep paying. It's similar to tech debt in this regard, where you're continuously paying interest until you pay off the debt or until you delete the feature. There's a big overlap between deleting stuff and tech debt. Deleting is after all, like the best way to get rid of tech debt, right? And on my team, we noticed that we spend over 40% on just keeping the lights on. That's just the base maintenance load, just triaging bugs, responding to questions, just maintaining the stuff, even if it's not used. That 40% is something that we could spend delivering value to customers, right? Like we could spend that 40% much better than just like paying off the mistakes of the past. And this doesn't just correspond to the teams adding the features or maintaining them. It's the whole organization, right? Even including customer support, because they keep getting tickets about your shitty features that you refuse to delete. And that bubbles like all throughout the organization, including the documentation, right? You have to write and maintain documentation. Nobody likes to do it, so why not just delete it? Other big one is that by having all of these undercooked features that we haven't deleted, we can actually undermine the other features that are actually working well. So your customers, you kind of erode your trust with your customers, and it's unsure to them which features are actually adding value and which aren't. And then there's the famous saying that you can't please everyone. So if you just keep adding new features to please like every single customer who comes with a feature request, you end up pleasing no one. And of course, this comes down to the overarching complexity. By having more stuff, you end up having a more complex product. We often talk about this buzzword, cognitive load. It's just all of the data you have to load into your memory so you can understand what's going on. And when you're modifying code, that's all of the code you have to think about to avoid breaking something. At News, we came up with another buzzword called user disengagement. We talk about it quite a lot. It's the opposite of what other companies, especially social media companies, are trying to do. They're trying to drive user engagement, because the more the users use the product, the more successful they are, whether it's ads or something else. For us, we want users to use the product as less as possible, so that they can actually spend time with their guests instead of clicking something on a computer. Having a complex product can also lead to a lack of focus. Like instead of being able to drive the outcomes you want and focusing on what's important, you're distracted by all these other things around. And one thing that often goes unnoticed is longer onboarding. Like the more complex your product is, the longer it takes to onboard not just your customers, but your employees as well. When it comes to customers, you can actually lose money. Like in news, we take most of our revenue from payments. So the longer it takes for a customer to start using news and start paying us, that's just money we're losing. And onboarding new team members, as you might know from like complex code bases, it can take 6 months or even a year, like to fully get onboarded in a code base, which would be completely unacceptable in hospitality, where the average tenure is 6 months. There's a lot of turnover. So if you spend 6 months training your staff to use the system, and then they leave right away, then they didn't really get you anywhere. Now, to have a good conference talk, there have to be some spicy takes. So here we are. I first gave this talk at .NET Conf, so I added some C# examples. Do we have any C# engineers in the house? Okay, a few, nice. So I'll go through it quickly. So as you can see there, we have quite a lot of ways that you can check for null in C#. And they don't work the same. This is really tricky. One of those examples will actually return a null reference exception when you're checking for null, which is pretty ironic. And some of these don't work the same way because you can override the equals operator or the equals method. So this can be really dangerous. And C# has been adding a lot of new features for handling nulls, like all of these fancy operators, which can just lead to a lot of pointless debates in pull requests, right? Everybody has their preferred approach, how to check for null, and we can just debate this for hours. In comparison, on the right side, that is how you do null handling in Go. There is exactly one way to check for null. And we can kind of measure this complexity in the number of new features that the language is adding. So this is, of course, like a super inaccurate measure because like one feature is not the same as another. But just to see like in the same like realm of like the same order of magnitude, we have C# and C++ adding roughly like the same number of features per year. It's a lot of features, which is one order of magnitude more than Go. Like the Go team is a lot more diligent when it comes to adding new stuff. Sometimes maybe too diligent. It took them a long time to add generics. But when they add something, they really make sure that it's useful. With C#, last year we've seen that there were already some features that were quite controversial, like primary constructors. Like people are not really sure whether they like these features or not. And all of these new features are much easier for veteran engineers who've been programming in C# since, I don't know, C# 6. So every year you just learn a little bit and you keep going. But this really raises the bar for new people who are trying to learn C#, and suddenly they have to learn all of this new magical syntax. So I would like to see C# go more in the way of Go instead of C++, which is known for its bloat and having 100 different ways to do one thing. And of course, it's a front-end conference, so I had to add some front-end stuff as well. I've been trying to learn front-end recently, and like most people, I got burned by double equals. I thought this was a normal way to check for equality for most languages. Why do we still have double equals in JavaScript? Like I know the answer is probably backwards compatibility, but still, this is like a hazing ritual for every new person who tries to learn JavaScript. They just have to learn, hey, don't use double equals. Like we have even gone so far that we have set up linters. I think ESLint has it enabled by default, that they check for double equals and recommend you to use triple equals instead. And that diagram you see over there, those are all of the type comparisons with double equals. And if it looks like a minefield, that's because it is one. And one more spicy one, of course, as most people nowadays, I started my front-end journey with React, right? Like it's sold as this like simple thing. Everybody should start learning front-end with React. But suddenly I was hit by this wall of complexity. I went through the official React docs, right? They're really nice, they're really helpful, but the recommended way in the docs is not to use React standalone, but to use it as a framework. And the most recommended framework is, of course, Next.js. And in Next.js, by default, you have React server components enabled by default, and you actually have to opt in to use client components. And suddenly, a person who was just trying to learn front-end is like learning all of this new framework stuff. They're doing back-end stuff without sometimes even knowing it. Like I've seen questions on Stack Overflow where people were asking why does this work weirdly? Like why doesn't this run on the client? Because they didn't even know they were writing server-side code. And when these server components were added, it was not it was not an official release. It was like an early release in React 18 for just Next.js. So the official recommended way to learn React was with like an experimental feature that only works in one framework. And now the support has been adding to React 19, so it's kind of stable, though it still doesn't support semantic versioning, so it's a bit questionable. And of course, this is a huge wall of complexity, right? Like as a new person. Like not just to front end, but to React, like you don't expect to be doing server-side stuff right away, and that you actually have to like opt out of doing server-side stuff because it's enabled by default. And I don't know, like this is something that really makes me nervous, just having like server-side and client-side code so close together. Maybe I'm just overreacting, but I think for new people, it's just really easy to make a mistake. And with this feature, I think we officially stopped pretending that React is just a library, right? Like the recommended way to use it is a framework, and React server components make it a framework. So that argument that it's just a library, I don't know. I think we all stopped pretending that it's that way when most people use it as a framework. Okay, so how do you know when to actually delete stuff? There's this nice quote from Hiram Wright, who's a software engineer at Google. And he said that at a certain point, like everything in your product will be used by somebody, whether correctly or incorrectly. I'm paraphrasing here. The original quote is more about API consumers, where every observable behavior will be depended on by someone. So if you have a bug in your API, somebody will depend on that bug. And fixing the bug is actually a breaking change because they consider it as a feature. So the most obvious way when you know how to delete something is just when it's not used properly, right? The only trick here is that we have to beware of the sunk cost fallacy. Just because we wasted a lot of time adding this new feature doesn't mean we have to waste even more time maintaining it and pretending that it does something and adds value. So on the right, you can see a real example from use. This is a project called Leaderboard, where hotels could compare each other and like see how well they're doing in certain areas. It's a really nice idea, and it was a side project from our CTO, so everybody was afraid to delete it. But when we looked at the data 1 year later, we saw that it has only like 40 clicks per day, and most of them are different people. So people were probably just clicking around the system, just randomly seeing what's there, and they weren't really using it. As per Hiram's law, like if you give people a button to click, they will click the button, right? So this tends to be the case with unfinished prototypes. And I think it's really important for experimentation to be able to admit when you're wrong, right? Like if you experiment, you try something new without really being sure, you get it out there, but then you need to have the self-awareness to admit this doesn't really work, we should delete it. I think if you don't delete unfinished prototypes, it will set the wrong example, and people will be afraid to experiment because they will think they will have to maintain this experiment forever. And some things can actually be so bad that they detract value. This is just the ratio of cost to benefit, which is of course really abstract, but as an example, you can imagine that maintaining some feature takes like 2 engineer salaries, and it doesn't bring as much money in customer value. But of course, there can be a lot more ways that it's detracting value. And these also tend to be the places with the most accumulated tech/design/product debt. So it's actually slowing you down internally as well. So hopefully at this point, I've convinced you that it's good to think about deleting stuff. So now how do we actually go about deleting it? And the easiest way is just to use data, right? Like most companies nowadays are data-driven, or at least they pretend to be data-driven. And we tend to use data for adding new features, right? You have a lot of like sales-led feature requests with a big number of money this feature will unlock. Well, now we can use data against them and use data to justify deleting stuff. As we saw with the leaderboard example, it's easy to start with the usage. If it's just unused, then nobody will care about deleting it. But it's still good to understand why those users who are still using it are using it. In general, it's good to talk to your users, but this is another reminder. You should talk to your users to understand their problems. And since this is something we don't really think about, there will be a lot of low-hanging fruit in your product. Like it's easy to find out you have unused code, right? So you can just delete unused code. When it comes to unused parts of the product, we should give it the same treatment. Maybe as a counterexample, you can see the number of projects that have been killed by Google. Since I last gave this talk, the number grew to 296. So maybe don't go as far as Google, but it does really show how important is it to focus, right? Because Google will be ruthless with deleting these like side projects that are basically just distractions for them, because their main product nowadays is still ads. And they're willing to go so far to get rid of even super successful products like Google Domains. Like Google Domains was really successful and was bringing them a lot of money, but compared to their ad business, it was nothing. So it was better for them to just stop focusing on it and sell it. And when you have these conversations about deleting stuff, it's really useful to flip the script. Instead of saying, what are we losing? It's better to focus on what are we gaining. So at the beginning, we talked about how adding something takes something away. Well, the inverse is true. If we get rid of something, we gain something. And whether it's just like shrinking your bug backlog, this is the best way to do it, right? If you have a screen that nobody's using and it has hundreds of bugs in your backlog, suddenly you can just get rid of all of those bugs. And you can also kind of use it as a prerequisite for adding new features as like technical enablement. Now, I wouldn't recommend that you lie to your product managers and say you have to delete something to add something. But those conversations tend to go a lot smoother if you tell them, hey, to deliver this shiny new feature, it would be a lot faster and more reliable if we can delete this deprecated feature first, because we don't have to think about all of the edge cases and support like the weird interactions that might not be expected. And as the last thing, we can make literally everybody happier, not just ourselves as the employees who are deleting stuff, but other departments in the company and the users as well. So if you're measuring NPS, like this is one way you can do it. Deleting stuff does really benefit everybody. Okay, this is everything from me. Thank you for your attention. I did some QR codes if you want to learn more. One of them is for my LinkedIn, if you want to hit me up. The other one is for the News Devs blog. We write about a lot of cool stuff. We have a lot of engineering articles there, so feel free to check us out. I don't think we have room for questions, right? We'll do that at the speaker's corner. So thank you all again for your attention, and go out there and delete some shit. Thank you.